The millionaire is sitting 3 seats away from you right now. Maybe on the subway, maybe in the coffee shop where you're listening to this. You wouldn't know it by looking at them. Their jacket is unremarkable. Their phone is 2 years old. They're not wearing anything that screams wealth, and that's exactly the point. Here's what nobody tells you about getting rich. The people who actually build lasting wealth, the kind that compounds over decades and buys genuine freedom, they're invisible. They've mastered something that runs completely counter to everything you see on social media, everything you've been taught about success, everything that feels good in the moment. They've learned to be quiet. And I'm not talking about false modesty or humble bragging. I'm talking about a fundamental rewiring of how you think about money, status, and what it means to win. Because here's the truth that's going to save you decades of wheel spinning. Every single dollar you spend to show other people you have money costs you approximately $10 in lost wealth. That's not a metaphor. That's math. Compound interest working against you instead of for you. Think about the last purchase you made that was meant to impress someone. The dinner that was a little too expensive. The car upgrade you didn't quite need yet. The vacation you posted 47 times. Now multiply that cost by 10 and imagine that money sitting in an account 30 years from now. That's the real price tag. And most people pay it their entire lives without ever running the calculation. The framework you're about to learn built 80% of first-generation millionaires in this country. Not the ones you read about in magazines. Not the crypto kids or the tech founders or the lottery winners. The ones who started with nothing, made decent but not spectacular money, and somehow ended up with 7 or 8 figures while their neighbors, who earned the same amount, ended up with nothing. The difference wasn't income. It was invisibility. There's a single mental shift that separates these two groups. It's the difference between seeing money as a way to show the world who you are and seeing it as a tool that buys you freedom from having to care what the world thinks. One group needs witnesses. The other group needs privacy. One group optimizes for the feeling of being rich. The other group optimizes for actually being rich. And those two things, as you're about to discover, are almost never compatible. By the time we're done here, you're going to see money completely differently. Not as something to perform with, but as something to accumulate quietly while everyone else is busy performing. You'll know exactly how to build wealth in a way that requires almost no willpower, because you'll have systems doing the work while your ego takes a permanent vacation. And most importantly, you'll understand why the richest person you know is probably someone you'd never suspect. Let's start with a scene you've probably lived some version of. Picture a Saturday night, 2 couples at dinner. The restaurant has mood lighting and small plates that cost what used to be a full meal. The men are talking about cars. One of them just bought something new, something German, something with features he's explaining in detail. The other man nods along, laughing, complimentary, but inside he's doing math. He's figuring out what he needs to do to keep up. His car is fine. It runs perfectly. But now it feels insufficient. The conversation moves to vacation plans. Someone went to Turks and Caicos. The photos were stunning. Now his trip to the lake house his family has gone to for 20 years feels suddenly boring, suddenly not worth mentioning. Here's what's happening in this moment that nobody talks about. The man who bought the car and took the island vacation is not winning. He's spending. The man who feels inferior is getting ready to lose by trying to match him. And neither one of them realizes they're playing a game where the only winning move is not to play at all. Because somewhere else in this same city, there's another man having dinner. Maybe it's at home. Maybe it's at a normal restaurant where the portions are reasonable, and the lighting is just lighting. He drives a car that's 7 years old and runs perfectly. He took his family camping and they loved it. And his retirement account has a comma in it that neither of the men at the fancy restaurant will see for another decade, if ever. He's winning, and nobody knows. This is the fundamental split in how people relate to money. The loud broke and the silent rich. The loud broke need you to know they have money. They need the validation more than they need the money itself. Every purchase is a signal. Every experience is content. Every possession is proof. And they will spend themselves into oblivion to maintain the performance, because the performance is the point. They're not building wealth. They're building an image of wealth. And images are expensive to maintain. The silent rich have discovered something liberating. Nobody needs to know. Your neighbor doesn't need to know. Your college friends don't need to know. The people you grew up with don't need to know. And the moment you truly internalize that nobody needs to know, you suddenly have all this money that was previously allocated to signaling, and you can redirect it toward actually building something. It's like discovering you've been pouring water into a bucket with holes in it your entire life, and someone just handed you a bucket without holes. Let me give you a number to think about. The average American spends somewhere between 20 and 40% of their income on what researchers call positional goods. Things they buy specifically because of what those things say about their position in the social hierarchy. The car that's nicer than necessary. The house that's bigger than needed. The clothes with logos. The restaurants that are more about the scene than the food. The vacations that are more about the photos than the experience. 20 to 40% of everything they earn, gone, just to maintain a position in a status game they didn't even consciously choose to play. Now imagine taking that 20 to 40% and redirecting it. Not to suffering, not to deprivation, but to invisibility, to looking completely normal while building something underneath that nobody can see. This is the stealth mode that we're going to spend our time together understanding, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And once you can't unsee it, every dollar you used to spend on status starts to feel like you're literally lighting money on fire. Your wealth is nobody's business. Not your parents, not your siblings, not your friends, not your coworkers, and especially not strangers on the internet. The moment you make your wealth other people's business, it stops being yours. It becomes a shared asset that everyone feels entitled to have opinions about, make requests toward, and judge you through. People will tell you you're cheap. People will tell you you're missing out. People will tell you they'd spend it differently if they were you. And if you're listening to them, you're already losing, because their opinion costs you compounding. Here's what happens when people know you have money. First, they recalibrate their expectations. The dinners get more expensive because they know you can afford it. The gifts get more extravagant because anything less feels cheap. The requests start coming in. Can you invest in this? Can you loan me that? Can you help with this thing that's really not that much money for you? And every single one of these interactions pulls you further away from the quiet accumulation that actually builds wealth. You're now managing other people's perceptions and expectations instead of managing your money. Second, you become a target. Not in a criminal way necessarily, though that happens too, but in a marketing way, in a social pressure way. The algorithm figures out you have money and starts showing you things that people with money buy. Your friends figure out you have money and start suggesting activities that cost what people with money spend. You've essentially opted into a higher cost tier of existence, and the only way out is to either spend to maintain it or look cheap by refusing. Both options cost you. Third, and this is the one nobody talks about, you lose your grip on reality. When everyone knows you're doing well, you get constant positive reinforcement for spending. People compliment your car. They love your house. They're jealous of your vacation. They validate every dollar you burn because from their perspective, you're winning. You're doing what people with money are supposed to do. And that validation feels so good that you keep doing it, even as your actual net worth stagnates or grows slower than it should. You're getting rich in perception while staying broke in reality. And perception doesn't compound. So the first principle of silent wealth is radical privacy. You need to build a wall between your money and everyone else's awareness of it. This doesn't mean lying. It means deflecting, redirecting, and giving people just enough information that they stop asking questions. When someone asks how much you paid for something, you say it was a good deal and change the subject. When someone asks how much you make, you say you're doing fine and you're grateful and change the subject. When someone assumes you can't afford something because you're not buying it, you let them assume it. You swallow your ego and let them be wrong. This is harder than it sounds because we're wired for status. We're wired to care what other people think. We're wired to correct people when they underestimate us. But every time you correct someone, every time you signal your true position, you're paying the tax, the ego tax, and it's the most expensive. I want you to think about the last time someone underestimated you financially. Maybe they assumed you couldn't afford something. Maybe they offered to pay for something in a way that felt slightly condescending. Maybe they gave you advice about money that assumed you were struggling when you weren't. How did that feel? Did you want to correct them? Did you want to show them they were wrong? That feeling, that urge, that's the ego tax showing up. And every time you pay it, you get further from your goal. The silent rich have learned to enjoy being underestimated. They've learned that there's a specific kind of power in being invisible, in having people assume you're average or even struggling while you're quietly building something they can't see. Because when people underestimate you, they leave you alone. They don't ask you for anything. They don't judge your choices. They don't have expectations. You're free to do whatever you want with your money, and that freedom is worth more than the temporary hit to your ego. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice. You need a system because willpower fails. Motivation fails. Good intentions fail. The only thing that doesn't fail is a system that makes the right choice automatic and makes the wrong choice require effort. This is the anti-budget budget. It's not about tracking every dollar or restricting yourself or feeling guilty. It's about making one decision that cascades into hundreds of right decisions without you having to think about it. Here's how it works. You decide on a number. This is the percentage of your income that disappears before you ever see it. Before it hits your checking account, before you can spend it, before you can even think about it. For most people starting out, this is somewhere between 15 and 30%. If you're already deep into the silent millionaire mindset, it might be 50% or more. The exact number doesn't matter as much as the automation. This money goes directly from your paycheck to accounts you don't look at regularly. Retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, savings accounts at different banks from your primary checking. The key is distance and friction. The money that's left over, that's your life. That's what you spend. And here's the magic part. You don't budget it. You don't track it. You don't feel guilty about it. You just spend it on whatever you want, because you've already paid yourself first. The wealth building is happening automatically in the background. You're not relying on willpower to save money at the end of the month. You're not hoping you'll have something left over after expenses. You're guaranteeing it by making it the first expense. This is the opposite of how most people approach money. Most people get paid, spend on whatever comes up, and hope there's something left to save at the end. There never is. Something always comes up. The car needs work. The wedding invitation arrives. The opportunity to invest in something presents itself, and the savings never happen. They're relying on future discipline to solve a present structure problem. The silent rich solve it with structure. They make the savings happen first, automatically, and then they live on what's left without guilt. Now, when you first set this up, it's going to feel like you took a pay cut. Because you did, on paper, the number in your checking account is going to be smaller than you're used to. And your brain is going to panic. Your brain is going to tell you that you can't afford this, that you need that money for life, that you're being too aggressive. Your brain is wrong. What's happening is that you're finally seeing your true discretionary income instead of living in the fantasy that all of your paycheck is available for spending. You're facing reality, and reality is always uncomfortable at first. The beautiful thing is that within about 3 months, you adjust. Your spending automatically calibrates to what's available. You find cheaper versions of things. You skip purchases you would have made before. You make do with what you have a little longer. And none of it feels like sacrifice, because you're not tracking it or thinking about it. You're just living within what's available. Meanwhile, in those accounts you're not looking at, numbers are growing. Automatically. Without effort. Without willpower. That's the system working. Let me tell you about someone who figured this out young. She was 24, just started her first real job out of college, making $42,000 a year. Not poverty, not wealth, aggressively average. She set up her direct deposit so that 25% went straight to her 401k, maxing out the employer match and then some. Another 10% went to a Roth IRA at a different institution. She never saw that 35%. It was just gone before it could become spending money. Her friends made similar amounts. Some made more. They all lived in the same city, did similar things, had similar apartments. The difference was invisible. She drove a car she bought used. She lived with roommates longer than felt cool. She packed lunch more often than not. Nothing about her life screamed deprivation or sacrifice. She went out. She took trips. She bought clothes. She just did all of it on 65% of her income while everyone else was doing it on 100%. And everyone assumed she made less than she did, because that's what her lifestyle suggested. Fast forward 15 years. She's now 40. Her friends are starting to panic about retirement. They're trying to figure out how to catch up. They're feeling behind. They're stressed about money in a way that's starting to define their lives. She's sitting on $700,000 in retirement accounts. At 40, she didn't make more than them. She didn't get an inheritance. She didn't hit it big on some investment. She just automated 35% of her income into accounts she didn't touch. And time did the rest. Compound interest printed money while she lived her life. And nobody has any idea, because she's still driving a car that's unremarkable, living in a house that's fine, and going to the same restaurants she always went to. That's the power of the system. That's the power of invisibility. That's what happens when you stop trying to look rich and start trying to be rich. The difference is everything. Now let's talk about income, because saving is important. But at some point, you hit a ceiling with savings. There's only so much you can cut from your life before it starts to hurt. The real wealth multiplication comes from earning more. But here's where the silent millionaire framework completely diverges from the typical advice you'll hear. Everyone wants to tell you to start a side hustle that's sexy, that's scalable, that's Instagram-worthy, that's your passion, and all of that is garbage advice for most people. The income streams you should be building are the ones nobody wants to talk about because they're boring. They're unsexy. They're not going to get you on a podcast. They're not going to make your friends think you're interesting. They're just going to make you money. And that's all that matters. The silent rich are not building personal brands. They're building income streams that work while they sleep and require minimal maintenance. And most of those opportunities are hiding in plain sight, dismissed by everyone else because they don't feel cool enough to pursue. Think about the person who buys a duplex, lives in one unit, rents out the other, and has their mortgage essentially paid by someone else. That's not sexy. That's not going to get you TikTok famous. It's also going to make you a millionaire if you do it right and repeat it a few times over 20 years. Think about the person who learns a high-value skill that businesses will pay for, charges reasonable rates, and just quietly does the work for 10 or 15 clients a month. That's not a revolutionary business model. It's also $5,000 to $10,000 a month in additional income that requires no employees, no overhead, and no drama. The opportunities that actually build wealth are usually the ones that make you feel slightly embarrassed to tell people about, because they're not cool, they're not innovative. They're not going to change the world. They're just profitable. And profit, not prestige, is what compounds. Every dollar you make from an unsexy income stream that you redirect into investments is a dollar that's working for you forever. Every dollar you make from a sexy side hustle that requires you to maintain an image, maintain a presence, maintain a brand, that's a dollar that costs you energy and time and usually more money to sustain. I want you to do something right now. Think about 3 income opportunities you've dismissed over the years because they weren't interesting enough. Maybe someone suggested you could tutor. Maybe you thought about buying a rental property, but it seemed like too much hassle. Maybe you're good at something that businesses pay for, but you never pursued it because it felt too normal. Write those down, because one of those is probably the income stream that changes your financial life, if you can get over the fact that it's boring. The silent rich are ruthless about this. They don't care if the income stream is boring. They don't care if it's not their passion. They don't care if it's not going to make them feel like an entrepreneur. They care if it's profitable, sustainable, and doesn't require them to be performative. Those 3 criteria eliminate 90% of the side hustles that people waste time on. And they illuminate the 10% that actually build wealth. Here's a real scenario to consider. You're at a party. Someone asks what you do. You tell them you're an accountant, or a teacher, or whatever your day job is. They nod politely, clearly losing interest. You could tell them about your real estate investments. You could tell them about the consulting you do on the side. You could tell them about the small business you own that runs mostly without you. But you don't, because the moment you do, the conversation changes. They want advice. They want details. They want to know how much you make. They want to pitch you on their thing. And you've just turned a boring conversation into an exhausting one. The silent rich have learned to be boring at parties. They've learned to give answers that satisfy curiosity without inviting follow-up. They've learned that the less interesting you are in conversation, the more freedom you have in reality. And that trade-off, boring conversations for financial freedom, is one they make happily every time, because they know something that most people don't. The most interesting financial position is the one nobody knows about. Let's go deeper into compound interest, because most people have heard about it, but almost nobody really feels it. It's like knowing intellectually that the Earth is round versus actually seeing it from space. The knowledge doesn't hit the same way as the visceral understanding. And without the visceral understanding, you won't make the choices necessary to harness it. So we're going to do something right now that's going to change how you see every dollar you spend for the rest of your life. Close your eyes for a moment. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Hold it for a count of 3. Let it out slowly through your mouth. Do that one more time. Breathe in, hold, release. Good. Now I want you to imagine you're holding a single dollar bill, just $1. It's crisp, new, straight from the bank. You have a choice. You can spend it right now on something that will give you 30 seconds of pleasure. A candy bar, a coffee upgrade, whatever. Or you can put it in an account that grows at 10% per year and leave it there for 30 years. If you spend it, in 30 years, that dollar is gone. The memory of that candy bar is gone. The 30 seconds of pleasure is gone. It's just vanished from your life. But if you invest it and leave it alone in 30 years, that $1 is worth $17.49. $1 became $17 and you did nothing. You didn't work for it. You didn't think about it. You didn't manage it. You just left it alone and let math do what math does. Open your eyes. Now multiply that by every dollar you earn for the rest of your working life. Every dollar is a choice between now and 17 times itself later. And most people choose now, not because they don't know better, but because they don't feel the future version of the money. It's abstract. It's theoretical. It's decades away. The candy bar is right there. The car upgrade is right there. The vacation is right there. And the 17 times multiplier is invisible, so it doesn't compete emotionally. The silent rich have developed the ability to feel the future money. They look at a purchase and they don't just see the price tag. They see the price tag times 17. They see the $40,000 car as a $680,000 car. They see the $5 coffee as an $87 coffee. And suddenly the math changes. Suddenly the purchase feels different. Not wrong necessarily, but different. And that difference is what allows them to make different choices. This is the compound interest cult. It's the small group of people who have internalized exponential growth so deeply that it changes their behavior without requiring willpower. They're not resisting temptation. They're genuinely more excited about the future money than the present purchase. And that shift, from having to resist to naturally preferring, that's the shift we're building toward. Because if you're relying on discipline and willpower to save money, you will fail. Willpower is finite. But if you can rewire your emotional response to money so that spending feels like losing and investing feels like winning, you'll succeed automatically. Let me give you the 30-year timeline. Not because 30 years is magical, but because it's roughly how long most people have between starting their career and wanting to retire. If you're younger, great. You have more time, and the numbers get even better. If you're older, the math still works. It just requires more intensity. But 30 years is the useful framework for most people. If you start at 25 and invest $500 a month into a broad market index fund that averages 10% returns, which is conservative based on historical performance, by the time you're 55, you'll have just over $1 million. You put in $180,000 over 30 years, and the market gave you $820,000 for free. You more than quintupled your money by doing nothing except showing up consistently and not panicking when things dropped. If you can invest $1,000 a month, you're at $2 million by 55. $1,500 a month, $3 million. These aren't fantasy numbers. These are just middle-class incomes with high savings rates and long time horizons. The silent rich aren't making money through genius or luck or connections. They're making it through boring consistency over long periods, while everyone else is chasing excitement over short periods. The most important thing you can do for your future self is to become boring with your money. Boring choices, boring investments, boring habits, boring consistency, because boring compounds. Exciting doesn't. Exciting is expensive. Exciting requires you to be constantly searching for the next thing, the next opportunity, the next edge. Boring is putting money in index funds and not looking at them for decades. Boring is maxing out your 401k every year regardless of what the market does. Boring is living below your means without making a big deal about it. And boring makes you rich. Now let's talk about invisible frugality. This is different from regular frugality, which everyone can see and judge you for. Regular frugality is clipping coupons and driving 20 minutes to save $3 on groceries and always ordering the cheapest thing on the menu. Regular frugality screams that you're broke, and it invites either pity or judgment depending on who's watching. Invisible frugality is cutting costs in ways that are completely undetectable to everyone around you. It's maintaining the appearance of normal while saving dramatically more than anyone. Suspects. The first principle of invisible frugality is to identify the difference between visible spending and invisible spending. Visible spending is anything that other people see and form opinions about. Your car, your clothes when you're out, your house from the outside, the restaurants you go to, the vacations you take. These things are expensive to be frugal about because cutting them signals something to the world. Invisible spending is everything else. Your grocery bill, your subscriptions, your insurance, your phone plan, the alcohol you buy at the store instead of the bar. Nobody sees these things. Nobody knows. Nobody cares. And that's where you cut aggressively. Let me give you some examples. You can drive a nice-looking car that's 7 years old and paid off instead of a nice-looking car that's new and costing you $600 a month. To everyone around you, you're driving a nice car. They don't know it's 7 years old unless they look closely, and most people don't. You just saved $7,200 a year, and nobody noticed. You can live in a neighborhood that's slightly less prestigious but still perfectly nice. Save yourself $400 or $500 a month in rent or mortgage. To your coworkers, you're just living in a normal place. They don't know what you're paying unless you tell them. You just saved $6,000 a year invisibly. You can stop buying drinks at bars and buy the same alcohol at the store for a quarter of the price. You can meal prep instead of buying lunch every day. You can cut every subscription service you're not actively using every single week. You can switch to a cheaper phone plan. You can shop at discount grocery stores. You can buy generic instead of brand name. None of these things are visible to anyone else. None of them make you look cheap. They just make you quietly wealthier. The second principle is to front-load your frugality into the big decisions. Most people try to save money on small daily things and then blow it on massive purchases they don't negotiate or think critically about. They skip the latte but then buy a house that's at the top of their budget. They pack lunch but then buy a car with a payment that eats 15% of their income. This is backwards. The big purchases are where the real money is. If you can keep your housing cost to 25% of your take-home pay instead of 40%, you've just freed up 15% of your income for the rest of your life. That's more impactful than 1,000 skipped lattes. The silent rich are ruthless about the big three: housing, transportation, and food. If you can keep those three categories lean, you can be relatively loose with everything else and still build wealth quickly. But most people do the opposite. They stretch on housing because they want the nice place. They stretch on transportation because they want the nice car. And then they try to compensate by being cheap on small things that make them miserable. They've optimized for suffering instead of for wealth. Here's a 30-day challenge for you. For the next month, I want you to implement 3 invisible frugality tactics. Not things that anyone will notice. Not things that will make you feel deprived. Just quiet redirects of money from low-value spending to your accounts. Maybe you switch your car insurance and save $100 a month. Maybe you start buying alcohol at the store before you go out instead of at the bar. Maybe you cancel 3 subscription services you forgot you had. Whatever it is, make it invisible. Make it automatic. And watch what happens to your savings rate without your life feeling any different. The emotional resistance you're going to feel during this challenge is important information. Because if you feel resistance to saving $100 a month on something nobody sees, that resistance is your ego. That's the part of you that wants to spend money, not because the spending brings value, but because not spending feels like losing. And that part of you is expensive. That's the part that will keep you broke forever if you let it drive. So feel the resistance, notice it, and do the thing anyway. Because on the other side of that resistance is a wealth-building habit that costs you nothing in quality of life and gains you everything in actual net worth. The ego tax is the most expensive thing you'll ever pay. It's not on your credit card statement. It's not a line item in your budget, but it's there, embedded in 1,000 small choices where you spend money to feel good about yourself, or to correct someone's false impression of you, or to maintain a position you're not even sure you want. The ego tax is what you pay when your self-worth is tied to your spending. And for most people, it's 20 to 40% of their lifetime earnings. Just gone. Burned. Sacrificed to the altar of other people's opinions. Think about the last time you bought something specifically because you didn't want someone to think you couldn't afford it. Maybe you were out with people who make more money than you, and when the check came, you insisted on paying your share even though it was more than you wanted to spend. Maybe someone suggested a restaurant that was too expensive, and instead of proposing something cheaper, you just went along with it because you didn't want to look broke. Maybe you bought something for your house or your car or yourself that you didn't really want, but you felt like it was expected at your age or income level or social position. That's the ego tax. And you've paid it more times than you can count. The ego tax shows up in 3 main ways. First, there's the keeping up spending. This is when you buy things because the people around you have them, and not having them feels like falling behind. The phone upgrade when your current phone works fine. The vacation that's more about the destination than the experience. The house or car or wardrobe that's sized to match your peer group rather than your actual needs. You're not buying these things because you want them. You're buying them because not having them feels like losing a game you didn't realize you were playing. Second, there's the correction spending. This is when someone underestimates you financially, and you spend money to prove them wrong. Someone assumes you can't afford something, and instead of letting them be wrong, you buy it to show them. Someone suggests a cheaper option, and you go with the more expensive one to signal that you don't need to pinch pennies. Someone makes a comment about your old car or your small house or your budget-conscious choice, and you make a mental note to upgrade so they can't make that comment again. Every dollar you spend to correct someone's perception of you is a dollar that was taken by your ego, not allocated to your goals. Third, there's the status maintenance spending. This is when you've established a certain lifestyle and you keep spending to maintain it, even though you'd be happier spending less. You've trained people to expect a certain level from you, and now you're trapped. You take expensive trips because that's what you do now. You go to expensive restaurants because that's where your friends go. You live in an expensive neighborhood because moving would feel like failure. And you're spending tens of thousands of dollars a year maintaining a position that brings you no joy, just to avoid the embarrassment of stepping back. All of this is the ego tax. And here's the brutal truth. The ego tax doesn't buy you anything real. It doesn't buy you respect. It doesn't buy you genuine relationships. It doesn't buy you security or freedom or peace of mind. It buys you the temporary absence of discomfort. It buys you not having to feel less than. It buys you not having to answer awkward questions. And in exchange for that temporary comfort, you give up decades of compound growth and the actual freedom that money can buy. You're trading permanent wealth for temporary status. And everyone who does that ends up in the same place, which is stressed about money and wondering where it all went. The silent rich have killed their ego, at least when it comes to money. They've accepted that some people will think they're cheap. Some people will think they're struggling. Some people will think they're missing out. And they've made peace with all of that, because they know what those people don't know. They know what's in their accounts. They know what's compounding. They know what their net worth actually is, and they don't need anyone else to know it. That's freedom. Let me tell you about someone who paid the ego tax for years before he figured it out. He was a doctor, made good money, not spectacular, but good. And from the moment he finished his residency, he started spending to look like what he thought a doctor should look like. The nice car, the nice house in the right neighborhood, the country club membership, the trips to places that sounded impressive when you mentioned them at dinner parties. And he was miserable. Not because any of those things were bad, but because he was spending every dollar he made maintaining an image, and the image required constant feeding. He had friends from medical school who made the same money. Some of them lived completely differently. They drove normal cars. They lived in normal neighborhoods. They didn't join the country club, and he judged them. He thought they were failing to launch. He thought they didn't understand success, until one of them mentioned casually over coffee that he was thinking about cutting back to part-time work in a few years because he was already close to having enough saved to retire if he wanted to. He was 42. That conversation broke something open. Because the doctor realized his friend, who he'd been judging for living below their station, was actually 15 years ahead of him financially. While he was spending every dollar on looking successful, his friend was saving 60% of his income and building actual wealth. And nobody knew. Nobody was impressed. Nobody was congratulating him. He was just quietly becoming financially independent while everyone else was busy performing. The doctor started making different choices. Not all at once, but gradually. He stopped upgrading his car every 3 years. He started questioning whether he actually enjoyed the country club or just liked saying he was a member. He moved to a smaller house in a less prestigious neighborhood, and when people asked about it, he said they were downsizing, and it was great for their lifestyle, which was true. And he started saving 50% of his income. Within a few years, his stress about money completely disappeared. He was still driving a nice car, just one that was paid off. He was still living in a nice house, just one that cost half as much. And he was building wealth at a rate that shocked him. The difference wasn't the money. It was the ego. He'd killed the part of himself that needed validation through spending. And once that part was dead, the money that used to go toward ego started going toward freedom. And freedom, it turned out, felt a lot better than validation ever did. So ask yourself this. What would you do differently with your money if nobody ever knew how much you had? If there was no one to impress, no one to keep up with, no one whose opinion mattered? Would you still buy the things you're buying? Would you still live where you're living? Would you still drive what you're driving? Because the difference between what you do with complete privacy and what you're actually doing, that's the ego tax. That's what you're paying for other people's perception. And it's costing you your freedom. Now let's talk about building your money monastery. The silent rich don't rely on willpower. They rely on environment. They've structured their physical space, their digital space, and their social space, so that the default behavior is wealth building, and deviation from that default requires conscious effort. It's the opposite of how most people live, where spending is the default and saving requires constant effort. When you flip that script, everything changes. Let's start with your physical environment. Look around your space right now. How many things are visible that you bought in the last 6 months? How many of those things do you actually use regularly? How many of them were impulse purchases that sounded good in the moment but have already faded into the background of your life? Every one of those items represents a moment where your environment failed to protect you from yourself. You were exposed to marketing, or temptation, or social pressure, and your environment didn't have any friction built in to slow you down. The money monastery has strategic friction. It makes spending require extra steps. It makes saving automatic. Here's what that looks like practically. Your checking account, the one your debit card is connected to, should only ever have enough money in it to cover your planned expenses for the current pay period. That's it. Everything else should be in accounts that are harder to access. Accounts at different banks. Accounts that take 3 days to transfer from. Accounts that require you to log into a separate website and confirm the transfer twice. You're building walls between your impulse and your money. When you see something you want to buy, and it's not in the budget, you can't just buy it. You have to go home, log into a different bank, initiate a transfer, wait 3 days, and then decide if you still want it. What percentage of impulse purchases survive that process? Almost none, because impulse purchases aren't actually about the item. They're about the feeling you're trying to create or avoid in that moment, and 3 days later the feeling has passed. The money stays in your account. That's the friction working. Your digital environment is just as important. You need to audit every app on your phone that connects to your money, every shopping app, every food delivery app, every subscription service, every one-click purchase option. These things are engineered to reduce friction between desire and purchase. They're designed to make spending feel like nothing. A tap, a swipe, a confirmation, and your money is gone before your rational brain even has time to evaluate whether you actually want the thing. Delete them, not disable. Delete. If you want to order food delivery, you should have to open a browser, go to the website, log in, enter your card information, and then complete the purchase. Make it annoying. Make it take 2 minutes instead of 10 seconds. You're not trying to eliminate convenience from your life. You're trying to eliminate the kind of convenience that costs you your financial future. And there's a huge difference. The same goes for your credit cards. If you're someone who struggles with spending, your credit cards should not be in your wallet. They should be at home, in a drawer, maybe even in a block of ice if you want to get dramatic about it. They should require you to make a deliberate trip to retrieve them, because most overspending happens in the moment, driven by emotion or social pressure or just the momentum of being out. If your card isn't accessible in that moment, the purchase doesn't happen. You go home. The moment passes. The money is saved. Now let's talk about your social environment, because this is where most people fail, even if they've structured their physical and digital environments perfectly. You cannot outrun a social group that spends more than you want to spend. You cannot stay disciplined if your friends expect expensive activities and judge cheaper alternatives. You cannot build wealth in private if the people around you are constantly pulling you back into public performance. Your social environment will either support your goals or sabotage them. There's no neutral. This doesn't mean you need to abandon your friends or become a hermit. It means you need to be strategic about who you spend time with and what activities you suggest. You need friends who are comfortable with cheap or free activities, who don't equate spending with fun, who aren't going to make you feel poor for suggesting a potluck instead of a restaurant or a hike instead of a spa day. And if you don't have those friends, you need to find them, because the wrong social group will cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime. Think about your current friend group. When you suggest a cheaper alternative to an expensive plan, what happens? Do people light up and appreciate the suggestion? Or do you get subtle judgment or jokes about being cheap or pressure to just splurge this once? If it's the latter, you have a choice to make. You can either train them over time that you're not available for expensive things, which will be uncomfortable, or you can quietly start spending less time with them and more time with people whose financial values align with yours. Both options are hard, but staying in a social group that burns your money is harder in the long run. The money monastery also includes your information environment. You need to be extremely careful about what content you consume, because content shapes desire. If you're watching YouTube channels about luxury cars, you're going to want a luxury car. If you're following people on Instagram who take expensive vacations, You're going to feel like you're missing out if you're not taking expensive vacations. If you're reading about expensive watches or designer clothes or high-end electronics, you're programming yourself to want those things. And once the want is there, it takes willpower to resist. And we've already established that willpower fails. The solution is to curate your information environment as aggressively as you curate your financial environment. Unfollow people whose lifestyle makes you feel inadequate. Unsubscribe from marketing emails. Stop watching content about products. Start consuming content about financial independence, about minimalism, about people who are building wealth quietly. You're not censoring yourself. You're recognizing that your brain is hackable, and the people trying to sell you things have gotten very good at hacking it. You're just protecting yourself. Let me walk you through a visualization exercise. This is going to take about 2 minutes. Get comfortable. Take a deep breath in through your nose, filling your lungs completely. Hold it for a count of 4. Now release slowly through your mouth. Again. Breathe in. Hold for 4. Release. Good. Now I want you to visualize your life 10 years from now. You've been following the Silent Millionaire framework for a decade. You wake up in the morning and before you even check your phone, you know that you're financially secure. You know that your accounts are growing. You know that you have options. You get ready for work, or maybe you don't, because you've built enough passive income that work is optional. You're driving a car that's 7 years old and runs perfectly. Nobody's impressed by it. You don't care. You pull up to a house that's comfortable but not impressive. Nobody's jealous of it. You don't care. You go through your day making decisions based on what you actually want, not on what will impress people or maintain an image. Someone invites you to an expensive dinner. You decline without guilt, without explanation, because you don't need to justify your choices to anyone. You're having people over for a potluck that night instead, and you're genuinely excited about it. You check your investment accounts. The numbers have gone up again. They always do over time. You didn't do anything to make that happen. The system did it for you. At the end of the day, you sit down with your partner or your journal or just yourself, and you realize something. You're not stressed about money. You're not wondering if you can afford things. You're not comparing yourself to anyone. You're just quietly and visibly wealthy, and it feels like freedom. That feeling, that's what we're building toward. Hold on to that for a moment. Feel what that would feel like, and then slowly come back to the present. Open your eyes. That future is available to you. It's not reserved for people who make more money than you. It's not reserved for people who got lucky. It's reserved for people who are willing to be boring, invisible, and patient. And you can be those things starting right now. Now let's talk about when to break silence. Because this entire framework is not about never spending money. It's not about deprivation or miserliness or living like you're broke when you're not. It's about spending strategically on things that actually matter and refusing to spend on things that don't. The silent rich spend money. They just spend it very differently from everyone else. There are 3 categories of spending that are worth it even though they don't build wealth directly. The first is health. Your body is the only truly irreplaceable asset you have. Every dollar you invest in maintaining it, preventing problems, and catching issues early is a dollar well spent. This means regular checkups. This means good food. This means exercise equipment or gym memberships if you'll actually use them. This means therapy or coaching if you need it. This means fixing the thing that hurts instead of ignoring it. The silent rich are not cheap about health because they understand that all the wealth in the world is worthless if you're too sick to enjoy it. The second category is relationships. The people you love, the people who matter to you, they're worth spending on, not to impress them, not to show off, but to create experiences and memories that actually strengthen the bond. This might mean flying home for holidays. This might mean thoughtful gifts that show you were paying attention. This might mean planning a trip that's about spending time together, not about posting photos. The key difference is intention. You're spending to deepen connection, not to perform connection, and you can usually tell the difference by how you feel after. If the spending brought you closer to someone, it was worth it. If it just created content or fulfilled an obligation, it wasn't. The third category is experiences that align with your actual values, not the values you think you should have, not the values that sound good to say out loud. Your real values, the things that make you feel alive and connected to something bigger than yourself. For some people, this is travel. For others, it's art or music or learning or adventure. The key is that these expenditures are chosen consciously, not reflexively. You're not going to Europe because that's what successful people do. You're going because something about that specific place calls to you, and the experience will change you in some way. That's worth spending on. Everything else, and I mean everything else, is optional. The new car when your old one works. The bigger house when your current one is fine. The designer clothes. The expensive restaurants that are more about the scene than the food. The gadgets, the upgrades, the stuff. All of it is optional, and most of it is actively working against your wealth-building goals. So the question you need to ask before every purchase is simple. Does this fall into one of the three categories? Health, relationships, or genuine values-aligned experiences? If yes, consider it. If no, it's probably ego tax or status spending, and you should let it go. Here's how to build your criteria for guilt-free spending. Take out a piece of paper or open a note on your phone. Write down the last 10 things you spent money on that weren't basic necessities. For each one, ask yourself if it improved your health, strengthened a relationship, or aligned with your deep values. Be honest. If you're struggling to justify it, that's information. If you immediately know it was worth it, that's information too. Now look at the pattern. Are there categories of spending that consistently bring you joy and value? That's where your money should go, freely and without guilt. Are there categories that consistently leave you feeling empty or regretful? That's where you're leaking money to ego or social pressure or habit. Those are the leaks you plug, not through deprivation, but through clarity. You're not giving anything up. You're redirecting money from things that don't matter to you toward things that do. That's not sacrifice. That's alignment. One of the most powerful tools in the Silent Millionaire framework is the 24-hour rule for non-essential purchases over a certain threshold. Pick a number. For most people, it's somewhere between $50 and $200. Anytime you want to buy something that costs more than that number and isn't an emergency or a planned purchase, you wait 24 hours. You can write it down, you can add it to a wish list, but you don't buy it for 24 hours. What this does is separate impulse from genuine desire. Impulse dies in 24 hours. Genuine desire survives. And when you come back the next day and still want the thing, and you can articulate why it matters and how it fits into one of your three categories, then you buy it without guilt. But most of the time, you'll come back and realize you don't actually care anymore. The moment passed. The money stayed in your account. That's the system working. Before we move into your 12-month action plan, I need to tell you about the single biggest threat to everything we've built so far. It's not market crashes. It's not job loss. It's not unexpected expenses. It's relapse. It's the moment when you've been doing everything right for 3 months or 6 months, or even a year, and then something happens. Someone buys something impressive and you feel that old familiar inadequacy. Your friend posts vacation photos from somewhere exotic and suddenly your camping trip feels pathetic. Your colleague shows up in a new car and your paid-off sedan feels like a rolling embarrassment. And in that moment, you're vulnerable. Relapse in wealth building looks like this. You've been saving 40% of your income. You've been living invisibly. You've been watching your accounts grow. And then you make one purchase. One big purchase that's all about ego. Maybe it's a car. Maybe it's a vacation. Maybe it's something for your house. And the purchase itself isn't the problem. The problem is what it does to your identity. Because the moment you make that purchase, you've cracked the door open to your old self. The self that needed validation. The self that cared what people thought. And that old self is patient. It'll wait for the door to crack, and then it'll push. One ego purchase becomes two. Two becomes a pattern. The pattern becomes a lifestyle. And within 6 months, you're back where you started. Same spending habits. Same stress about money. Same performative relationship with wealth. Except now it's worse. Because you know better. You had the system. You saw it working. And you gave it up for temporary validation. That's the relapse cycle. And it destroys more wealth-building journeys than anything else. So we need a relapse-proofing plan. We need to prepare for the moments when your resolve weakens, when the old identity calls you back, when invisibility starts to feel like losing instead of winning. Because those moments will come. They come for everyone. The difference between people who build lasting wealth and people who yo-yo forever is what they do in those moments. First, you need to identify your trigger situations. These are the specific scenarios that make you want to spend on status. For some people, it's being around family who judge their lifestyle. For others, it's certain friends who always suggest expensive activities. For some, it's social media. For others, it's work environments where people show off. You need to know your triggers the way someone in recovery knows their triggers. Because once you know them, you can either avoid them or prepare for them. Take a moment right now and think about the last 3 times you spent money on something you knew wasn't aligned with your goals. What preceded those purchases? Were you with certain people? Were you on certain apps? Were you feeling a certain way? Write down the pattern. That pattern is your early warning system. When you notice it happening again, you know you're entering dangerous territory. Second, you need response protocols for each trigger. If your trigger is Instagram, your protocol might be that you delete the app for a week every time you notice yourself feeling inadequate after scrolling. If your trigger is certain friends, your protocol might be that you only see them in settings where money isn't a factor. Hikes, game nights at someone's house, free events. If your trigger is family gatherings where people show off, your protocol might be that you give yourself permission to leave early or to have a rehearsed deflection for questions about your car or house or job. The key is that these protocols are decided in advance when you're clear-headed and committed, because in the moment of temptation you won't have clarity. You'll have emotion. And emotion will tell you that one purchase won't matter, that you deserve it, that you've been so disciplined, and you should reward yourself. Emotion is a liar when it comes to money. Your protocol, decided when emotion wasn't running the show, that's what you trust. Third, you need a relapse recovery plan. Because even with triggers identified and protocols in place, you might slip. You might make the ego purchase. You might spend money on status even though you know better. And when that happens, most people spiral. They figure they've already blown it, so they might as well keep going. They've broken their streak, so the streak doesn't matter anymore. That's the thinking that turns a mistake into a catastrophe. Your relapse recovery plan is simple. The moment you realize you've made an ego purchase, you do three things. 1, you acknowledge it without shame. You literally say out loud, I just paid the ego tax. I made a choice that wasn't aligned with my goals. That's information, not identity. 2, you immediately increase your automated savings by whatever you just spent. If you spent $5,000 on something ego-driven, you figure out how to redirect an extra $5,000 to your investments over the next few months. You're neutralizing the damage. 3, you revisit your why. You remember why you started this. You reconnect with the version of yourself that's free because you were disciplined, and then you move forward. No shame, no spiral, no identity crisis. Just acknowledgement, correction, and continuation. That's how you turn a relapse into a blip instead of a trajectory change. Now let me tell you about someone who almost relapsed but caught herself. She'd been following the silent millionaire framework for 8 months. She was saving 55% of her income. Her net worth had grown by $40,000. She felt great. And then she went to a wedding. The wedding was at a resort. Everyone was dressed incredibly well. The conversations were all about jobs and houses and cars and trips. And she felt like she didn't belong. She was wearing a dress she'd had for 3 years. She drove to the wedding in her 10-year-old car. Let's talk about the final piece of this framework, your 12-month action plan, because everything we've discussed is useless if you don't implement it. An implementation requires a plan with specific milestones, specific metrics, and specific accountability. You can't vague your way into wealth. You need numbers. You need dates. You need clarity. Here's what your next 12 months should look like if you're serious about this. Month 1, you're setting up the system, automating your savings, creating distance between your checking account and your investment accounts, auditing your subscriptions and cutting the ones that don't serve you, calculating your true discretionary income after you pay yourself first. This month is all structure, no heroics. Month 2, you're implementing invisible frugality. You're finding 3 to 5 areas where you can cut costs without anyone noticing. You're switching insurance. You're meal prepping. You're buying generic. You're making the big purchase decisions that will save you money for years. And you're tracking how it feels. You're noticing the resistance. You're pushing through it. Month 3, you're auditing your social environment. You're identifying which relationships support your goals and which ones sabotage them. You're having conversations with the people who matter about your new financial priorities. You're getting comfortable with being boring at parties. You're practicing saying no to expensive activities without apologizing or explaining. Months 4 through 6, you're building your unsexy income stream. You're identifying the opportunity you've been dismissing because it's not cool. You're setting it up. You're doing the boring work of making it happen, and you're redirecting every dollar it produces into your investment accounts. This is where the wealth building accelerates. Months 7 through 9, you're killing your ego tax. You're identifying every area where you're spending to maintain an image or prove something to someone, and you're consciously choosing to stop. You're downgrading. You're simplifying. You're getting comfortable with people underestimating you, and you're watching your savings rate climb. Months 10 through 12, you're optimizing. You're looking at what worked and doubling down. You're looking at what didn't work and cutting it. You're refining your system, and you're checking your numbers. Where were you 12 months ago? Where are you now? What did compound interest do for you while you were just living your life? You're seeing the proof that the system works. At the end of 12 months, you should have hit several milestones. Your savings rate should be at least 10 percentage points higher than it was when you started. Your net worth should have increased by more than your savings alone because your investments grew. You should have at least one new income stream that's producing money without consuming all your time. And most importantly, you should feel different about money. Less anxious, less performative, more in control. But here's the thing about 12-month plans. They're not actually about 12 months. They're about building habits that last forever. The real milestone isn't what happens at month 12. It's what happens at month 24, and month 48, and month 120. Because that's where the real wealth is. That's where the compounding gets absurd. That's where you wake up one day and realize you have options that most people will never have, and nobody knows. And you didn't have to sacrifice anything that actually mattered. The Silent Millionaire framework is not a get-rich-quick scheme. It's a get-rich-inevitably system. If you follow it, wealth is not a possibility. It's a mathematical certainty. The only variable is time. And the beautiful thing about time is that it passes whether you're building wealth or not. You can spend the next 30 years performing success and end up broke. Or you can spend it being invisibly strategic and end up free. The days are going to pass either way. The question is what you're building during them. Let me leave you with a final scenario. Two people, same age, same income, same city, same cost of living. They start their careers on the same day making the same salary. Person A spends everything, not recklessly, just normally. They have a nice car with a payment. They live in a nice apartment that takes 40% of their income. They go out regularly. They take nice vacations. They buy nice things. They look successful. Everyone thinks they're doing well. They're not saving much, but they're young. They'll worry about that later. Person B spends 60% of what person A spends, not because they're deprived, not because they're struggling, but because they're invisible about it. They drive a car that's fine but not impressive. They live in an apartment that's comfortable but not prestigious. They go out, but they're strategic about it. They take vacations but to places that don't photograph well. They look average. Everyone assumes they make less than they do. They're saving 40% of their income from day one, fast forward 30 years. Person A is 55 years old. They've had a good run. They've enjoyed their life. They have memories and stories and a social media history that looks amazing. They also have about $75,000 saved for retirement. Maybe $100,000 if they were particularly disciplined in the last few years. They're starting to panic. They're realizing they're going to have to work until they're 70, maybe longer. They're stressed. They're trying to figure out how to catch up, and there's no catching up. The compounding happened or it didn't, and for them, it didn't. Person B is also 55. They've also had a good run. They've also enjoyed their life. Their memories are different, but not worse. Just different. And they have $2.3 million in their accounts. They could retire right now if they wanted to. They could work part-time. They could start a business with no concern about failure. They could travel for a year. They could do whatever they want, because money is no longer a constraint. They won, and nobody knows. They still drive a car that's fine but not impressive. They still live in a place that's comfortable but not prestigious. They still look average, but they're free. The difference between person A and person B was never income. It was never luck. It was never genetics or connections or market timing. It was one decision made early to be invisible with money, to redirect the resources that would have gone to looking successful toward actually becoming successful, to choose privacy over performance, to be boring on purpose. And that one decision, compounded over time, created a completely different life. You're at a choice point right now. You can close this out and go back to your life exactly as it was. You can hear everything I said, agree with it intellectually, and then change nothing. Most people will. Or you can decide that starting today, you're going to be different. You're going to be boring. You're going to be invisible. You're going to prioritize wealth over status. And you're going to let the math do what the math does. If you choose the second option, here's what I need you to do right now, before you do anything else. Before you move on to the next thing on your list, or the next piece of content, or the next distraction, I need you to open your banking app and set up one automated transfer. Pick a percentage, even if it's just 5% to start. Have that money move automatically from your paycheck to a separate savings or investment account. Do it right now. Because if you don't do it right now, you won't do it. You'll mean to. You'll plan to. And it won't happen. Automation beats intention every time. Once that transfer is set up, you're done. You've made the decision. Everything else is just refinement. You're now on the path of the silent millionaire. You're now someone who's building wealth invisibly while everyone else is busy performing. And over time, the gap between you and them is going to widen. Not in a way anyone can see, but in a way you'll feel every single day. You'll feel it when you're not stressed about money. You'll feel it when you can say no to things without guilt. You'll feel it when you check your accounts and see numbers that used to feel impossible. You'll feel it when you realize you have options. And eventually, you'll feel it when you wake up one morning and realize that money is no longer a constraint in your life. You still have boundaries. You still make choices. But the choices are based on what you want, not on what you can afford. That's freedom. And the beautiful thing about freedom is that nobody needs to know you have it. You can be free in private. You can have options nobody suspects. You can be building something that doesn't require an audience. That's the final gift of the Silent Millionaire framework. Not just wealth, but private wealth. Wealth that doesn't come with expectations or requests or judgments. Wealth that's yours, fully yours, to use or not use however you want. The path is clear. The system is simple. The math is inevitable. All that's left is your decision. Will you be loud and broke or silent and rich? Will you spend the next 30 years performing or building? Will you optimize for looking successful or being successful? Nobody else can make this choice for you. Nobody else will know if you make it or not. That's the whole point. This is between you and your future self. And your future self is begging you to choose wisely. Choose to be the millionaire sitting on the bus that nobody recognizes. Because that person, the one nobody notices, that's the person who won. That's the person who's free. And that person can be you. The work starts now. The system is waiting. Your future is compounding. All you have to do is get out of your own way, kill your ego, and let math do what math does best. I'll see you on the other side, though neither of us will mention it when we do. That's the whole point.